You are now tuned into Virtually Impossible presents Lazy Learning Land podcast, where we teach teachers how to be lazier yet more effective to increase student performance but decrease teacher burnout and stress. I'm S.Dot, your hostess that always gives you the mostest while doing the least, also known as the queen of working and not working. With over 15 years of experience working at the hood schools, and I absolutely love it, I am here to share with you the tricks of the trade I have developed that will make your life as a teacher so much easier, and even help you to fall back in love with the profession. Today's episode is sponsored by Lazy Learning Land podcast on TikTok, where we skip all the fluff and give you the real deal applicable stuff. You can watch teacher tip shorts, comedic shorts, and even watch me interact with my real students during class periods, all while implementing tips that I share with you. Go follow Lazy Learning Land on TikTok. Now for today's episode. All right. Welcome everyone to another episode of Lazy Learning Land podcast. Super excited for the show that we have in store for you today, because we are definitely going to tackle what in the heck do you do when the honeymoon phase is over? What do you do when the honeymoon phase is over? This is definitely something that as teachers, we all experience. And if you are new to the profession, you are sure to experience it sooner than later. Let's get right into it. So it definitely always strikes my funny bone, y'all, when I have friends and family that call me and ask me, how was my first week of school? They'll call and be like, how was your first day? How was your first week? And I'm like, I laugh and I'm genuinely like, it's a piece of cake. I mean, after all, the first week or the first weeks of school are usually a piece of cake. This is because, the students want each of their teachers to like them. They want to be viewed as an angel that does their work and that's well-mannered and has a side of self-control. Unfortunately, this desire in those students does not last long for many of them. Eventually, their mask begins to slip and fall, and the real them is suddenly revealed. The version of them that knows how to look busy but doesn't actually complete any work. The side of them that rolls their eyes, sucks their teeth, talks back, and has an attitude when they don't get their way. Oh yes, and let's not forget the part of them that will talk to anybody, and I do mean anybody that you sit them next to. You see, I could go on and on and on and on for days about the major switch ups that our students tend to do to us once these first weeks of school and that honeymoon phase is over. But what difference would that make? What difference would it make for me to keep telling us the problems? We need to get some solutions, correct? So as teachers, we need to develop a plan to combat this issue head on before it is too late. And by too late, I do mean before we lose complete and utter control over our classrooms. You see, it is absolutely natural for the honeymoon phase to end. It happens in all relationships. But what is not okay is for us to not quickly, abruptly, and at the first signs of trouble, snatch our students back into following our expectations. Now you might be wondering, well, how might one go about this? Well, my fellow educators, I'm about to go all in and line it out for you right here, right now. So what do you do the first weeks of school after the honeymoon phase is over? And number one, we're going to roll right into number one, is to nip it in the bud. Let's face it, kids will be kids, and they will only get away with what we allow them to get away with. This means they have to test you several times to see what you will and will not let slide consistently. They are not fazed, not one little bit, about you putting your foot down on the same topic once or twice. I actually took some time to do some research on this, guys, and research shows that students, on an average, they test boundaries 3 to 5 times before they willingly fall in line. Now, this is per kid. So if you have on average, let's say 25 kids in your classroom, and each kid tests the boundaries 5 times, 25 times 5, that's like 150 times of you having to redirect your students. Crazy, right? But that's exactly what it's going to take. And if you even let the smallest infractions go, it sets the tone for undermining you. It allows your authority inside your classroom to be absolutely disrespected. But this is, it is pivotal time for us to address every behavior that veers off course. That is why number one is nip it in the bud. When the first weeks of school honeymoon is over, let nothing slide. Zip. Zero. Not even the smallest lack of compliance. You have to be willing to show your students that you will sacrifice their learning, sacrifice their grade, and sacrifice their access to privileges when they are resistant to your classroom expectations. Next up on the list is be consistent. Being consistent means to be unwavering about when you enforce your rules. You should only be making exceptions to your rules about 1% of the time, and typically for extreme and rare cases only. That being said, the other part of being consistent is enforcing the rules no matter who the student is. That's right. Teachers are human, and we naturally have kids that fall into our favorite category, ones that we gravitate more towards than others. But the key is for you as the teacher to know who your favorites are and for your students to have absolutely no clue who your favorites are. Usually where teachers mess up, and I mean really mess up, is they enforce the rules unequally. The kid that tends to misbehave more, barely does their work, the teacher has a tendency to throw the book of rules at them if they even breathe wrong. However, if it comes to one of our favorite students, we tend to give them several free passes. The bad kid sees it. Heck, all the other kids in the class see it too. And doing this absolutely kills your credibility and lessens your ability to have control of your classroom. Students are more likely to follow the rules when they feel like the rules apply to everyone equally. Once the first weeks of school honeymoon is over, if rules only apply to some, you start to lose respect of the majority of your students. You will then begin to see that you are receiving lots of pushback and lots of very intentional, calculated misbehavior. Number 3, avoid power struggles. In a previous podcast, I talk about addressing how to handle student-teacher conflicts. So if you haven't listened to Hold Expectations, Not Grudges, please go do that. But after you listen to this one. And it just talks about holding students accountable. But if you haven't latched onto that one yet, I do highly recommend it. And I also recommend, if you're more interested in knowing how to handle student defiance without getting into an actual power struggle, then check out that post, Collaborate or Else, When Students Refuse. And I know it says collaborate in it, but it definitely talks about how do you get kids to comply and skip over the power struggle phase. Okay, let's keep going. While all teachers crave compliance, creating a confrontation in front of the entire class is an absolute no. The student will automatically feel as if they have to buck up at you because all of their peers are watching and all of their peers are listening. You may want to try to have a more personal conversation with that student. Usually, I would say in the hallway whenever possible. And no matter how much we step into the role of parents, teachers, I need you to hear me on this. No matter how much we step into the pseudo role of parents, we are not the parents of our students. That being said, we should not be out here giving these kids ultimatums. Instead, you always want to offer the little darlings some options, by providing choices. You see, this gives the student a false sense of control. And I do mean false, because the options that you provide for them, you want to make sure that the options that you don't want them to pick, those options should come with less favorable outcomes on the student's behalf. It's a little bit of a Jedi mind trick. You see, because in the event that the student actually picks one of those less favorable options, they bypass the right to be upset with you simply because they selected their own poison. They picked this for themselves. So always be sure on top of that you state to them, because some kids will be like, I don't like none of them options, so I ain't gonna pick one. You gotta be, think 10 steps ahead. So you always want to be sure that you state. And by the way, if you choose not to make a choice, that means I have to decide for you. And again, that is key because it disarms the student from being able to be angry with you. If you make the choice for them because they refuse to make a choice, then that was their choice and ultimately still on them. All in all, when the first weeks of school honeymoon is over, you are simply trying to foster respect without losing control of your classroom. Number 4, y'all, keep it in-house. Now, what exactly do I mean by keeping it in-house? I am referring to managing as many of your behavior issues yourself inside of your own classroom. You must be prepared to dish out disciplinary consequences to your own student. Because the more you outsource your consequences, the less your students will mind and respect you. They will, however, mind and respect the other people that are giving them the consequences. So you want to, as much as possible, be that person that they end up respecting in the end. If the only way you can get your students in line is to call their parents every other day or write them on a referral so an administrator can handle it, or to send them out to other classrooms for another teacher to deal with them and to give them a good talking to, you are in fact not just losing the battle, boo-boo, you are losing the entire war. You are losing the war at that point. Sidebar, I'm not referring to extreme situations like when you get cussed out, a kid just walks out of class, a kid, smells like marijuana, things like that. Kid has a weapon. I'm not talking about those major cases. I'm talking about just true, open defiance, refusal, those types of things. Handle those things in-house as much as possible. You see, as the first weeks of school honeymoon comes to an end, your students will only begin to honor and respect you once you show them your willingness and your ability to manage discipline consistently. Do y'all see a pattern how the word consistently kind of keeps coming up in these different tips? Okay. When you address issues directly and in a fair manner, you are establishing clear-cut boundaries, allowing an environment to develop where your students know that you will make good on your promises, that you will follow through on your expectations instantly. All right, y'all, the last tip number 5, which I think is my absolute favorite, which is reward the right. Very rarely will a teacher encounter a class where 100% of the students are just straight up knuckleheads. That being said, a great method of getting your students back on track is to reward the few, the proud, and the compliant. Positive reinforcement will not only motivate those students into doing right, it will not only motivate those students that are doing right to continue to keep up the good work, it will send a very powerful message to the ones who are not doing right. The petty Patty in me says that a bit of healthy jealousy can spark an desire in those students for them to get on board. You see, once the first weeks of school honeymoon ends, highlighting the behaviors you want to continue is key. Using positive reinforcement encourages others to follow suit. When students see their peers being praised, see them being rewarded, or seeing them enjoying special privileges, it lights a fire in them, opening the door for fostering a classroom culture where doing the right thing becomes the norm. All right. So in conclusion, about to sum this baby on, okay. While the honeymoon phase is enjoyable for everyone, both students, teachers alike, it is important for teachers to remember that this does not last forever. You have to know this, and the key is to be ready when students' behavior starts to shift. As soon as you see the first signs of their mask slipping, you need to act quickly and decisively. If you can catch it when the mask has only slipped and has not yet completely fallen off, then and only then do you stand a chance of still having an amazing school year. Addressing even minor infractions and reinforcing your expectations will prevent larger issues from taking root in your classroom, while giving you a stronger chance of maintaining your ideal classroom environment throughout the year. However, if you allow behaviors to go by unchecked, the consequences can be astronomical for you as the teacher. You see, the longer students are allowed to test your limits unchecked, the harder it becomes to reel them back in. That's when unwanted and unchecked behaviors can escalate. See, they always start small. And then they just build and build and build and build and build because these kids get really intrigued because they want to see just how far they can push the envelope. And that creates the risk of losing complete and utter control of your classroom. At this point, all masks are off and restoring order will be an uphill battle. And I'm talking about one that can take weeks or even months to overcome if you got the balls to be able to overcome it. The good news is that you can avoid this scenario by nipping issues in the bud early on. Be consistent and avoid power struggles. Handle your own discipline within your classroom whenever possible, and absolutely make sure to reward those students who are doing the right thing. Doing these things enables you to create a classroom culture where respect, compliance, and positive behavior can thrive, ensuring that you and your students can still have an amazing school year even after the honeymoon phase has ended. Thanks for tuning into today's episode of Virtually I'm Possible Presents Lazy Learning Land podcast. Comment below your thoughts on what to do when the honeymoon phase is over. What are some things that you are willing to do for your classroom in order to maintain control? And what are some things that you have tried that have worked for you in the past? Since there is strength in lazy, be sure to like, follow, comment, and subscribe to this podcast, my blog on virtuallyimpossible.net, no apostrophe, and our social media platforms on TikTok under Lazy Learning Land, on Pinterest, Virtually I'm Possible without the apostrophe, and Instagram as virtually_I'm_possible, so you can feel at home among other lazy learners. Until next time, live long and lazy and never, ever, 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 ever work too hard.